Hollywood has always been in the business of selling dreams. And for much of the 20th century, one of its most carefully managed products was the image of its stars. Who they were, how they lived, and who they loved. Behind the glamour, studios ran a machinery of control that reached into the most intimate corners of their stars' lives. Contracts came with morality clauses, and when a private life became a problem, they had a solution ready. They arranged a marriage. These unions, known as lavender marriages, were entered into by gay or actors to protect their careers and their studio's investments. Some were quietly negotiated, some were ultimatums, and a few stars refused entirely. Here are 15 made-up Golden Age marriages Hollywood used for PR. Number 15, Rudolph Valentino and Jean Aker. Before Rudolph Valentino became the smoldering symbol of romantic desire that the entire world would know him as, he was a struggling Italian immigrant trying to find work in Hollywood. He had done odd jobs, ballroom dancing, bit parts, uncredited roles, and by 1919, he was finally beginning to attract attention. Jean Aker was an actress with better industry connections than he had. She was part of the inner social circle of Alla Nazimova, one of the most powerful and influential women in silent-era Hollywood, and also Aker's partner at the time. When Valentino met Aker at a Hollywood party in September 1919, he was taken with her. She agreed to marry him, and the wedding took place on November 5, 1919, at the home of film producer Maxwell Carger. It ended the same night. Aker reportedly locked Valentino out of their hotel room on their wedding night, and then fled to the apartment of actress Grace Darmond, with whom she was also romantically involved. The marriage was never consummated. Valentino spent months writing letters trying to win her back. She did not return. They eventually divorced in 1923, after years of legal back and forth. What made the situation even more complicated was that Valentino was himself the subject of persistent questions about his own sexuality. Questions that the press formalized in 1926 when a Chicago Tribune editorial called him a pink powder puff for the supposedly effeminate roles he had been playing. He challenged the author to a boxing match to prove his masculinity. He died of peritonitis shortly after, in August 1926, at the age of 31. The irony is that whatever Valentino's private life actually contained, his marriage to Jean Aker, which was meant to provide the appearance of conventional romance, collapsed publicly and spectacularly before it had even properly begun. Number 14. Rudolph Valentino and Natasha Rambova. Having survived the wreckage of his first marriage, Valentino fell into a second one that historians have also debated ever since. Natasha Rambova was not born with that name. She was Winifred Kimball Shaughnessy of Salt Lake City, Utah, who had reinvented herself so thoroughly that even her name sounded like a stage character. She was a costume and set designer of genuine talent, and she was, like Aker before her, connected to Alla Nazimova's world. Rambova had been the art director on several of Nazimova's productions. Valentino and Rambova married in Mexico in 1922. But because California law required a full year to pass after a divorce before remarrying, and Valentino hadn't waited the required period after his divorce from Aker, he was arrested for bigamy when the couple returned to the United States. They were forced to live separately for a year and officially remarried in Indiana in March 1923. Their marriage was publicly stormy and privately controlling. Rambova had strong opinions about Valentino's career and inserted herself into his film deals in ways that alienated studio executives and directors. Rumors about both of their sexualities circulated throughout their marriage. They separated in 1925. The marriage ended officially in 1926, the same year Valentino died. Whether either marriage was specifically arranged by a studio or simply entered into by two people who both had complicated private lives and found a kind of mutual cover in each other is a question historians still debate. What is clear is that both unions served the function of keeping the press focused on Valentino's romantic life with women at a time when his masculinity was being actively questioned. Number 13. William Haines and the marriage he refused. William Haines occupies a singular place in Hollywood history, not because he agreed to a lavender marriage, but because he refused one and paid the price. By the early 1930s, Haines was one of the biggest box office stars in Hollywood. The 1930 Quigley poll, a survey of film exhibitors, named him the top box office attraction in the entire country. He had made a smooth transition from silent pictures to sound, and MGM's own Irving Thalberg had held him up as the new model of the male romantic lead for the talking age. He was, by any measure, a genuine star. He was also openly living with a man named Jimmy Shields, whom he had met on a trip to New York in 1926. Their relationship was no secret within Hollywood. It was widely known. For years, the studio had looked the other way. Then, in 1933, Haines was arrested at a YMCA in Los Angeles. Louis B. Mayer called him into his office and delivered the kind of ultimatum that studio heads were accustomed to issuing without much pushback. Get married to a woman or lose everything. Haines looked at Mayer and said quite simply, "I am already married." He was fired. His contract with MGM was terminated, and his acting career effectively ended. What happened next is remarkable. Haines and Shields went into the interior design business together, and their company became one of the most sought after in Los Angeles. Joan Crawford, who remained a close and loyal friend, hired Haines to decorate her Brentwood home and launched his second career by word of mouth. He became one of the most celebrated interior designers in Hollywood, working for clients including Jack Warner, Frank Sinatra, and Gloria Swanson. Crawford called them the happiest married couple in Hollywood. They remained together until Haines's death in December 1973. Jimmy Shields died a few months later, having left a note that read, "I now find it impossible to go it alone. I am much too lonely." They are buried side by side in Santa Monica. Number 12, Barbara Stanwyck and Robert Taylor. In May 1939, two of MGM's most valuable contract players walked down the aisle together in what the studio presented as the natural culmination of a great Hollywood romance. Barbara Stanwyck had been one of the most independent and formidable actresses in the business for a decade. She was one of the very few major stars who refused to sign long-term exclusive contracts with a single studio, working instead across multiple lots, Columbia, Warner Brothers, RKO, and MGM, on her own terms. Robert Taylor, born Spangler Arlington Bruh in Nebraska, was the kind of handsome that caused problems for him. So symmetrically beautiful that audiences and critics struggled to take him seriously. MGM had spent years trying to toughen his image. The pair had appeared together in two films, His Brother's Wife in 1936 and This Is My Affair in 1937. And the studio had been encouraging their pairing publicly for some time. After they were named one of Hollywood's most popular unmarried couples by the press, MGM urged them to formalize the arrangement. They married on May 13, 1939. Biographer Axel Madsen, who wrote the definitive biography of Stanwyck, described the marriage plainly as a lavender arrangement, entered into to put to rest persistent questions about both stars' private lives. It was an open secret within the industry that Stanwyck had significant relationships with women throughout her life, and Taylor's behavior in his early years at MGM had raised questions that studio publicists had been managing for some time. They remained officially married for 11 years, divorcing in February 1951. Stanwyck, despite the nature of the arrangement, reportedly cared deeply for Taylor and was devastated by the end of the marriage. She never spoke publicly about her personal life and never married again. Number 11, Rock Hudson and Phyllis Gates. By the mid-1950s, Rock Hudson was one of the most commercially powerful actors in Hollywood, handsome in a way that seemed almost too complete, and popular enough that studios handled him with exceptional care. His agent was Henry Wilson, a man who had essentially invented Rock Hudson, born Roy Harold Shearer Jr. in Winnetka, Illinois. Wilson gave him his name, his image, and the career machinery that turned him into a star. Wilson's roster of clients included some of the most prominent men in Hollywood, and he was known for his ability to package a kind of mid-century American masculinity that audiences responded to deeply. He was also gay, deeply entangled in Hollywood's closeted social world, and very good at keeping secrets, including his own. Hudson's breakthrough came in 1954 with Magnificent Obsession, which elevated him from promising newcomer to genuine leading man. He was 28 years old, earning enormous amounts of money and being photographed constantly. The scrutiny was relentless. In 1955, Confidential magazine, the most feared gossip publication of the era, known for its willingness to run stories that the major newspapers would not touch, was preparing to expose Hudson's relationships with men. Wilson moved quickly. He struck a deal. He supplied the magazine with damaging stories about two other, less valuable clients in exchange for killing the Hudson piece. Then, to close the vulnerability permanently, he arranged a marriage. The bride was Phyllis Gates, Wilson's own secretary, a woman from Dawson, Minnesota, who had worked her way to Los Angeles via a career as a flight attendant and then a talent agency. Hudson and Gates married in Santa Barbara on November 9, 1955. The ceremony was small. The press coverage was warm and extensive. Rock Hudson, fan magazines confirmed, had found his match. The marriage lasted 3 years. Gates filed for divorce in April 1958, citing mental cruelty. During the divorce negotiations, she had reportedly hired a private detective to record conversations with Hudson about his affairs with men, transcripts of which have surfaced in subsequent years. She received a settlement and the house. Whether she knew from the beginning that the marriage was a PR arrangement remained a matter of dispute for decades. Gates maintained until her death in 2006 that she had genuinely believed in the marriage, while Hudson's close friends told biographers that Gates was fully aware of the arrangement and was herself a lesbian. Hudson never publicly acknowledged his sexuality during his lifetime. When he was diagnosed with AIDS in 1985, his publicist's initial statement described it as liver cancer. He died in October 1985. His close friend Elizabeth Taylor became one of the first major celebrities to speak openly about the AIDS crisis in the wake of his death, co-founding the American Foundation for AIDS Research that same year. Number 10. Tab Hunter and the Natalie Wood Campaign. Tab Hunter was one of the last actors signed to an exclusive contract by a major studio. Warner Brothers locked him in just as the old system was beginning to crack. What the studio got was a blonde, broad-shouldered actor whose face appeared on roughly 60 million fan magazine covers during the peak years of the 1950s. It also got a problem. Hunter had been arrested in 1950 at a private party that included gay men. Confidential magazine ran the story in 1955, and for a few weeks, it looked like his career might be finished. The studio moved fast. Photoplay, which worked closely with the studios and had a much wider circulation than Confidential, ran Hunter and Natalie Wood on its cover that same season, identifying them as the year's most popular new stars. The coverage drowned out the scandal. Warner Brothers followed up by sending Hunter and Wood to premieres, award ceremonies, and public events together, a carefully managed campaign that ran for several years. They appeared together in 2 films, The Burning Hills and The Girl He Left Behind, both in 1956. Hunter later described Wood as being like a kid sister to him, and Wood has been reported to have understood the arrangement. Behind that public image, Hunter had begun a relationship with Anthony Perkins, the actor who would later become famous for Psycho. The two men kept their relationship private for decades. Hunter came out publicly in his 2005 memoir, Tab Hunter Confidential, and spent his later years in a relationship with producer Alan Glazer. Number 9. Judy Garland and Vincente Minnelli. Judy Garland's marriage to director Vincente Minnelli in 1945 was presented as one of the great Hollywood romances of the post-war era. Two brilliantly talented people who had found each other on the set of Meet Me in St. Louis, the film Minnelli directed and in which Garland starred. The film was not without its own tensions. Garland reportedly resisted the casting and the director's stylistic choices early in production. But the professional friction gave way to something else by the time filming wrapped, and the studio, specifically MGM, under Louis B. Mayer, recognized an opportunity. Minnelli's homosexuality was known within Hollywood circles long before his career at MGM elevated him to one of the most celebrated directors in the studio system. His aesthetic sensibility, his social world, and his personal life were all relatively transparent within the industry. Mayer had encouraged the relationship between Minnelli and Garland, seeing in a marriage between them a useful piece of stabilizing publicity for a star whose personal struggles with medication, anxiety, and erratic behavior had already become an open secret at the studio. Garland was a deeply complicated figure, extraordinarily gifted, enormously managed, and by the mid-1940s already carrying the weight of 15 years of studio pressure, including the years as a child performer when MGM had controlled her diet, her schedule, her medications, and her public image. A marriage to a well-regarded director offered the studio a narrative of maturity and stability that would have been difficult to manufacture any other way. Garland and Minnelli married on June 15, 1945, at the home of Garland's mother. Their daughter, Liza, was born the following year. The marriage ended in divorce in 1951. What is documented is that Garland was aware of who Minnelli was. In later years, she would reportedly advise her daughter Liza, who herself married gay men, that gay men made the best husbands. It was a remark that said a great deal about what Garland understood about the world she had lived in, and the arrangements it required. Number 8. Gaynor and Adrian. Janet Gaynor was the first person ever to win the Academy Award for Best Actress. She received the inaugural award in 1929 for her work in 3 films: Seventh Heaven, Street Angel, and Sunrise. She was one of the most beloved stars of the silent era, and her transition to sound extended her career through the 1930s. Off-screen, Gaynor had for years had a close relationship with actress Mary Martin, a friendship that biographers have described as a romantic partnership. She had also been through 2 previous marriages that had not worked out. Her third marriage, in 1939, was to costume designer Adrian Greenberg, known professionally simply as Adrian. Adrian was one of the most influential figures in Golden Age Hollywood fashion, the man who designed the ruby slippers in The Wizard of Oz, the gowns Joan Crawford wore in film after film, and the iconic padded shoulder look that defined women's fashion of the 1930s. Adrian was widely understood within Hollywood to be gay. His marriage to Gaynor gave both of them a publicly acceptable domestic life during a decade when the pressures of the morality clause era were at their height. They remained married for 20 years, until Adrian's death in 1959. Whether their arrangement was organized by a studio or was simply a mutual understanding between 2 people who genuinely liked and respected each other is not entirely clear. What is clear is that it worked, for both of them, and for the studios whose stars they remained. Number 7. Alla Nazimova and Charles Bryant. Before she became the queen of Hollywood's lesbian social underground, the woman whose circle of friends included Jean Aker, Natasha Rambova, and some of the most significant female figures in silent film, Alla Nazimova had already constructed a marriage as a professional shield. Nazimova had emigrated from Russia to the United States at the turn of the century and built a formidable reputation as a stage actress before moving to film. She was imperious, enormously talented, and entirely uninterested in the conventions that governed other women's lives. In Russia, she had been briefly married to a man named Sergei Golovin, but that marriage had ended years before she came to America. In Hollywood, she presented Charles Bryant, a British actor, as her husband. They were not married. Their relationship had been fabricated as a professional convenience, and the arrangement was maintained for years, long enough that the public, and even some people within the industry, believed it entirely. Bryant accompanied her to industry events, lived in her home, and played the role of devoted husband with apparent comfort. Nazimova's private life was centered on women. Her social circle, which was known within Hollywood as the sewing circle, included actresses and other women in the industry who were in relationships with other women, many of whom were also managing public personas that bore almost no relation to their private lives. The circle included Jean Aker, with whom Nazimova had a relationship, and Natasha Rambova, who came into Nazimova's orbit and eventually went on to marry Valentino. When Nazimova eventually allowed the truth of her non-marriage to Bryant to surface in the 1920s, she had already outlasted the usefulness of the fiction. By then, she had invested her film earnings into a grand property on Sunset Boulevard that she turned into a hotel and bungalow complex, the Garden of Allah, which became one of the most famous gathering places in Hollywood history, frequented by writers, actors, and artists for decades. She died in 1945. The Garden of Allah was demolished in 1959. Number 6. Cary Grant and Virginia Cherrill. Cary Grant arrived in Hollywood in the early 1930s as Archie Leach from Bristol, England, a name he had already left behind by the time Paramount signed him and set about transforming him into one of the most elegant screen presences the medium had ever produced. His accent was mid-Atlantic, his wardrobe impeccable, his timing comic and precise. He was, by almost every measure, a manufactured ideal and a thoroughly convincing one. His first marriage, to actress Virginia Cherrill in February 1934, was brief and turbulent. Cherrill was best known for her role as the blind flower girl in Charlie Chaplin's City Lights, a beautiful performance in a film that has endured as one of the masterpieces of silent cinema. The marriage lasted less than a year. They separated in September 1934 and divorced in 1935. Both parties were publicly vague about the reasons. Whether the marriage was actively arranged by a studio or was simply an early and unsuccessful relationship is debated. What is less debated is what came after. For several years following the divorce, Grant and actor Randolph Scott shared a house together in Santa Monica and later Malibu, a living arrangement the studios attempted to present as the uncomplicated domestic situation of two bachelor friends who simply found it convenient to share a home. Fan magazines ran photo spreads at the house. The images showed two men grilling outdoors, lounging in the garden, living the easy California life of two pals. The press cooperated. Grant cycled through 5 marriages over the course of his life, and his daughter Jennifer Grant has said publicly that her father was not gay. The question has never been definitively settled by any documentary record. What is clear is that the studio system worked very hard to manage the narrative around his personal life for decades, and that the tools it used, carefully staged photography, cooperative columnists, and strategically timed publicity, were precisely the same tools it applied to every other star whose private life required management. Number 5. Niels Asther and Vivian Duncan. Niels Asther was a Swedish actor who arrived in Hollywood in the late 1920s with dark good looks and a romantic quality that studio executives recognized immediately as marketable. MGM signed him and built him as a leading man, pairing him with significant female stars and building his image around an air of exotic mystery. The studio was also managing a persistent set of questions about Asther. Their solution was a marriage to Vivian Duncan, one half of the popular vaudeville duo, the Duncan sisters. The two married in 1930. The marriage was understood within the industry to be a convenience, arranged to provide Asther with the appearance of conventional domesticity. It lasted only until 1932. After the marriage ended, Asther's career began to contract. The studios that had built him had less interest in managing him once the arrangement dissolved, and by the late 1930s, he had drifted away from major productions. He worked steadily in smaller roles through the 1940s before eventually leaving Hollywood. He returned to Sweden and died in Copenhagen in 1981. Number 4. Cesar Romero. The Bachelor, the studios never questioned. Cesar Romero's story is slightly different from the others on this list, in that no specific marriage was arranged for him. Instead, the studios relied on a more flexible fiction. They labeled him a perpetual bachelor, a dashing charmer who simply hadn't met the right woman. Romero was born in New York to Cuban parents and built a career as one of Hollywood's most reliable leading men from the 1930s through the 1950s. Handsome, versatile, and always impeccably dressed. He is perhaps best remembered by audiences of a certain age for his gleefully over-the-top portrayal of the Joker in the 1966 Batman television series, a role he took in part because it gave him the chance to have fun on screen in a way that his carefully managed image had long constrained. Fan magazines dubbed him the Bachelor of the Year, with a regularity that eventually became a kind of running joke. The title kept appearing long after the joke should have expired. Romero was gay, known to be so within Hollywood, and carefully protected by the studio system's preference for selective ignorance. He never publicly discussed his personal life. He died in 1994 at the age of 86, never having married and never having been asked to explain why by anyone in a position to do anything about it. Number 3. Liza Minnelli and Peter Allen. Liza Minnelli, daughter of Judy Garland and Vincente Minnelli, both of whom had navigated their own complicated marriages for complicated reasons, married Australian entertainer Peter Allen in March 1967. Allen was charming, enormously talented as a pianist and songwriter, and gay. He had been discovered and mentored by Judy Garland herself while performing with his partner Chris Bell as the Allen brothers at the Hong Kong Hilton in 1964. Garland caught their act while on tour, was taken with them, and brought them back to America as her opening act. It was through this connection that Allen entered the Minnelli family's orbit, becoming close with Liza and eventually proposing. The wedding was covered extensively in the entertainment press as a natural and joyful union. Two young, talented people connected by the world of entertainment and by their shared relationship with Garland, who had died in 1969, 2 years into the marriage. Their marriage lasted until 1974, when they divorced. 7 years after the split, Allen publicly acknowledged that he was gay. He went on to have a significant songwriting career. He co-wrote Arthur's theme, Best That You Can Do, which won the Academy Award for Best Original Song in 1982, and wrote or co-wrote songs recorded by artists across multiple decades. He died in 1992, at the age of 48, from AIDS-related complications. Minnelli has spoken warmly of Allen in subsequent years, acknowledging the complexity of the relationship and the affection that was genuinely part of it, alongside everything else. It was, like so many of these marriages, not reducible to a single story. Number 2. Ramon Novarro and his many romances. Ramon Novarro was one of the great stars of the silent era, a Mexican actor born José Ramón Gil Samaniego in the city of Durango, who MGM built into one of the most romantic leading men of the 1920s. He appeared in Ben-Hur in 1925, playing the title role in a production that was at the time one of the most expensive films ever made. The chariot race sequence alone required thousands of extras and months of filming. He was extraordinary in it, and audiences responded enormously. He was at one point considered a direct rival to Rudolph Valentino for the title of Hollywood's most desired leading man. He was also gay, and the studio knew it. MGM never pressured Novarro into a specific lavender marriage. Instead, the studio's publicity department generated a steady stream of manufactured romantic associations with leading ladies, none of which were real. Fan magazines carried stories about his supposed affections for various actresses. Photographs were arranged. The publicity machinery created and sustained the illusion of a romantic life that bore almost no relation to his actual one. What makes Novarro's case particularly interesting is that within Hollywood, his private life was not especially secret. He was known to be gay by producers, directors, and fellow actors across the industry. The management of his public image was less about preventing Hollywood from knowing than it was about preventing the public from knowing, a distinction that mattered enormously in an era when the fan magazines and the studios were in constant, mutually beneficial communication. Novarro remained in the closet throughout his career, working steadily into the sound era before his career at the major studios contracted. He appeared in smaller productions and character roles in later decades, and was less protected by the machine that had once managed him so carefully. He was murdered in his home in Hollywood in 1968 at the age of 69. 2 brothers were convicted of the crime. He died as he had lived in public, his real private life never fully acknowledged by the industry that had shaped it so carefully for so long. Number 1. The studio system itself. It would be incomplete to tell 15 individual stories without saying something about the machinery that produced all of them. The morality clause entered Hollywood contracts in the 1920s, first introduced by Universal Film Company as a provision allowing studios to cancel a performer's contract if they were found to have forfeited the respect of the public. The language was broad by design. It covered criminal behavior, public scandal, unconventional relationships, and anything else a studio decided was bad for business. Same-sex relationships, by definition, fell under its shadow. So did unwanted pregnancies, interracial romances, and public drunkenness. The clause was an instrument of comprehensive control, not a targeted one. The press cooperated, not out of innocence, but because the arrangement was mutually beneficial. Fan magazines like Photoplay and Modern Screen ran the stories the studios fed them and received access to the stars in return. Interviews were granted, photographs were supplied. The implicit agreement was that the magazines would not run anything the studios did not want run, and in return, they got the access that made them profitable. Even the notorious Confidential magazine, which built its entire business model on scandal, could be negotiated with. Studios supplied it with acceptable scandals involving lesser stars in exchange for it killing stories about bigger ones. Henry Wilson, Rock Hudson's agent, did exactly this in 1955, trading stories about 2 other clients for the safety of his most valuable one. The transaction was ugly, but it was entirely typical of how the system worked. Gossip columnists Hedda Hopper and Luella Parsons were among the most powerful people in Hollywood, not because of what they printed, but because of what they agreed not to print. And because every studio in town knew it and managed them accordingly. A bad relationship with either columnist could damage a career. A good one could protect it. The Hays Code, in full enforcement from 1934, banned the depiction of on-screen entirely. What could not be shown could also not be spoken of. The cultural machinery reinforced the personal one, and together they created an environment in which the lavender marriage was not an aberration, but a logical extension of everything else. And so the marriages continued. Some quietly entered into, some manufactured under pressure, some genuinely complicated arrangements between people who liked and respected each other and found mutual shelter in the arrangement. The stars who went along with the system were not simply cowardly. They were operating inside a structure that had been built specifically to contain them by people with enormous financial resources and the legal authority to destroy careers overnight. William Haines chose his partner over his contract. Most of the others did not have that kind of clarity or that kind of courage. What Hollywood built during the Golden Age was one of the great image-making machines in modern history, and its power extended all the way into the bedrooms and courthouses of the people who worked inside it. The stars on this list were extraordinarily talented people who were asked to play one more role off camera, the role of someone they were not. Most of them played it. Some played it for decades. Some found real friendship and even affection inside the arrangements the studio had made for them. Others endured years of quiet misery inside a fiction they had not chosen. And some, like William Haines, refused the part entirely and found that life on the other side of the studio system, while harder and more exposed, was at least their own. These are stories from a world that no longer exists in quite the same form. The morality clause is still in Hollywood contracts, but its reach is different now. The gossip magazines have been replaced by something faster and less controllable. And the question of who a star loves is, for most studios in most circumstances, simply no longer a matter for the publicity department to manage. But these stories still deserve to be told, honestly and completely, as part of what Hollywood actually was, behind the light and the music and the perfectly arranged photographs. If this story was worth your time, please consider giving it a like and subscribing to the channel. There are more stories like this one waiting. We'll see you in the next one.